Today we are going to be reading Sleeping Beauty, which is the first story in our new domain, which is all about fairy tales. Our learning objectives for today are to discuss elements of stories, identify characters, settings, and events in a fairy tale, demonstrate an understanding of the word wisdom and the phrase the land of Nod, and then write a sentence about one of the elements of Sleeping Beauty. Our key vocabulary for today are enchanted, prick, spell, virtue, and wisdom. Enchanted is an adjective, and it means under a magic spell. Maria and Malik knew they were in an enchanted forest because there were jewels on the trees instead of leaves. Prick is a verb, and it means to pierce or to make a small hole or cut with something pointed or sharp. After sharpening his pencils, Bryce was careful not to prick himself on the sharp ends. Spell is a noun, and it means words or a word or words believed to make magic happen. Addison pretended to cast a spell on her room so that it would clean itself every day. Now that's a spell I would want to learn. Virtue is a noun, and it means goodness. The people in the land tell many stories of the virtue and kindness of the queen. Wisdom is a noun, and it means good judgment, understanding what is right and what is wrong. My grandmother is known for her wisdom and good advice. All right, so far in CKLA, we have read and listened to a mixture of fiction and nonfiction texts. What does it mean if a text is fiction? What about nonfiction? So our fiction texts are the ones that are made up, okay? They are not real. Nonfiction are things that are true, okay? They often give us facts about a topic. So if we think about a story, like a story that we would listen to in class, a story that you might hear before bedtime, is that going to be fiction or nonfiction? It's probably going to be fiction. In this domain, we are going to learn more about a special kind of fiction story called a fairy tale. Have you ever heard of a fairy tale? What are some characteristics of a fairy tale? We have the setting, which is where and when the story is taking place. We have the characters, which is who the story is about. We have our plot, which is the beginning, middle, and end. We have fantasy, which is the imaginary or magical events. And then we have problems and solutions, which that's pretty easy for you to understand what those are. And then we have an ending that is always happily ever after kind of ending. So we read a fairy tale earlier this year in CKLA, Cinderella. Let's use a somebody wanted but so then chart to retell Cinderella and then look at how Cinderella has each of the characteristics from a fairy tale. Oopsie, that's not what I wanted to hit yet. So let's think about who was the somebody in Cinderella? Cinderella. And what did she want? She wanted to go to the ball. But what happened? She had evil stepmother and stepsisters who didn't let her go. So what happened after that? The fairy godmother, she came and she gave Cinderella a beautiful dress and a way to get to the ball, right? And then the prince fell in love with her and they lived happily ever after. So that's what happened in there. Did we talk about a setting? Well, we didn't really talk about a setting, but we know that there was a setting, right? It was in a castle and at Cinderella's house. What about characters? Yeah, we had Cinderella, we had the fairy godmother, and the mice, and the stepmom, and the stepsisters, and the prince. Okay, we had a whole bunch of characters. The plot, which was the beginning, middle, and end, which we basically just retold with the somebody wanted but so then. Fantasy. Was there anything that was imaginary or magical that happened in Cinderella? Absolutely. The fairy godmother, she made Cinderella's dress that was all like torn up and rags. She turned it into this beautiful gown, right? And she turned the mice into horses to draw the carriage. And she made a pumpkin into a or into a carriage, right? And she had a stagecoach and everything. And that's not for real. That's imaginary or magical. Was there a problem in Cinderella? Yeah, her stepmom and her stepsisters were not very nice to her, and they were not treating her very kindly. But the solution was that the fairy godmother was really nice to her, and then the prince fell in love with her, and then they lived happily ever after. And what about the ending? What did I just say? Yeah, they lived happily ever after. So those are all characteristics of a fairy tale, and Cinderella had all of those characteristics in them. Wow. All right. So in this domain, we are going to read many fairy tales. And those fairy tales, including the one that we hear today, were collected long ago by two brothers named Jacob and Willem Grimm, also known as the Grimm brothers. So this red spot where's my mouse? Right here is Germany, okay? And the brothers lived in a place that we now call Germany, and many of the stories that we know now as fairy tales had been told by orally or by mouth for many years. And the brothers, Jacob and Willem Grimm, decided to write those stories down and make a book of them. So you may know some of these fairy tales that we're going to hear. In today's fairy tale, and in another fairy tale that you're going to hear later, you're going to hear about spinning wheels. Spinning wheels are tools that were used to spin thread and yarn. The spindle, where's my mouse? Here it is. The spindle is the stick-like tool on the spinning wheel where the thread or yarn goes after it is spun. People use parts of certain plants, such as cotton and flax, wool from animals like sheep and alpacas, and even hair from certain goats and rabbits to make thread or yarn. Most thread and yarn is made by machines in factories today, but some people still use spinning wheels to make their own thread or yarn. Okay, so now we don't really use spinning wheels anymore, and most of the time it's done by machines, but some people might still use them. All right, so our key vocabulary, we've got enchanted, prick, spell, virtue, and wisdom. So we're going to listen carefully to the fairy tale so that you can find out about a problem with a spinning wheel. If you've already heard this story, I want you to listen to see if this version is the same or different from the one that you know. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who for many years were very sad because they had no child. At last, a little daughter was born to them, and the king was so happy that he planned a great feast in the palace to which he would invite all of his friends and relatives. A feast is a big fancy meal. People sometimes have a feast at parties or celebrations, but most of the time it's when something special is happening. What do you think this list that the king has is? What do you think that is? Might be the list of kinds of food he wants at his feast, or maybe it's the people that he's going to invite to his feast. Now, In his country, there were 13 fairies. Of course, the king wished to invite all the fairies to the feast too, so that each might look kindly upon his child and perhaps give the baby a special fairy gift. But as the king had only 12 gold plates for the fairies to eat from, it was decided that one fairy had to be left out. How do you think that 13th fairy is going to feel about not being invited and being the only fairy that wasn't invited? Probably not too great. All right. I want you to count those fairies. Ready? Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So only 12 of the 13 fairies were there because only 12 were invited. The feast was held, and what a wonderful celebration it was. As it drew to an end, the fairies came forward to give the child their special gifts. One said to the child, "I give you the gift of virtue so that you may be good." Another said, "I give you the gift of wisdom so that you may be wise." So remember that virtue is another word for goodness, and wisdom is the ability to know what is right and what is wrong and to make good choices. A third fairy gave the child the gift of beauty. A fourth gave her riches, and on it went, with each fairy giving everything in the world that one could wish for. 11 of the fairies had given their gifts, and the 12th was just about to speak when suddenly in came the 13th fairy, the one who had been left out. She was very angry, and she cried out in a loud voice, "When the princess is 15 years of age, she shall prick herself with the spindle and die." So remember, we talked about prick means to make a small hole or cut on something pointed or sharp, like the spindle of a spinning wheel. Without another word, the angry fairy left the hall. Everyone was terrified at what she had said. Then the 12th fairy came forward and said, "I cannot undo the evil spell, but I can soften it. Here is my gift to the child. The princess shall not die, but she will fall into a deep sleep for 100 years." So, how did the 12th fairy soften the spell? She changed it from the princess dying to she'll just sleep, but she's going to sleep for 100 years. That's still a long time. The king was determined to protect his child. "Surely," he said, "my daughter cannot prick herself with a spindle if she never sees one." So he gave an order that every spindle in the kingdom would be burned. So why would he want to burn all the spindles in the kingdom? Because she can't prick herself if there's no spindle left, right? So he's trying to get rid of all the spindles so that it's not possible for her to prick herself on one. The princess grew up, and all the fairies' gifts to the child were plain to see. She was good, wise, kind, and beautiful. Everyone who saw her loved her. On the day that she turned 15, the king and queen were away from the palace. The princess was left on her own, and she wandered about the palace looking into all sorts of places and peeking into rooms that she had never explored before. She climbed a narrow winding stair that led to a little door with a rusty key sticking out of the lock. She turned the key and the door opened, and there, in a little room, sat an old woman with a spinning wheel, busily spinning away. Uh-oh, what do you think is going to happen? "Good day," said the princess, entering the room. "What are you doing?" she asked, for she had never seen a spinning wheel before. So why hasn't the princess seen a spinning wheel before? because her dad, the king, tried to get them all burned, right? That was his plan, to burn all of the spinning wheels so she can never see one, so she can't ever prick herself. I am spinning, said the old woman. The princess stretched forth her hand and asked, what is this thing that spins around so merrily? But hardly had she spoken when she pricked her finger on the spinning wheel's spindle, and in that very moment she fell into a deep sleep. Why did she fall asleep? Because that was the gift that the 13th fairy, the 13th fairy said she would die, but the 12th changed it so that she would only fall asleep, right? Oopsie, did I skip one? I think I did. At the same time, sleep fell upon everyone in the palace. Do you see the milkmaid? Do you remember what a milkmaid is? We talked about it in our fables unit. It's a woman who milks the cows, right? The king and queen, who had just come home and were in the great hall, fell fast asleep. The horses in their stalls, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons on the roof, and the flies on the wall, all fell asleep. Even the fire on the hearth went out. The wind stopped, and not a leaf fell from the trees. In time, a hedge of thorns began to grow around the castle, which grew thicker and higher every year, until last nothing could be seen of the castle, not even the flags on the highest towers. As the years passed, stories spread throughout the land of a beautiful princess sleeping behind a wall of thorns. Many a young prince came, but none could break through the thorns. But at long last, after many, many years, there came into the country a king's son who heard an old man tell that there was a castle standing behind the hedge of thorns, and that there was a beautiful, enchanted princess lay asleep. The prince said, I shall make my way through and see the lovely princess. The old man warned him that many had tried and failed, but the prince would not listen. Now the 100 years were at an end, and the day had come for the sleeping princess to be awakened. When the prince drew near the hedge of thorns, it changed into a hedge of beautiful flowers, which bent aside to let him pass. When he reached the castle yard, he saw the horses and dogs lying asleep, and on the roof the pigeons were sitting with their heads under their wings. As he entered the castle and climbed the steps, the prince saw everyone still asleep. The king, the queen, the cook, the maids, everyone. All was so quiet that he could hear his own breathing. At last the prince went up the narrow winding stair and came to a room where the princess was sleeping. When he saw her looking so lovely in her sleep, he could not turn his eyes away. He bent down and kissed her, and she opened her eyes and smiled at him. Together they went down the stairs, and they saw the king and queen waking up, and all the people in the castle waking up and looking at each other in great surprise. The horses in the yard got up and shook themselves. The dogs sprang up and wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof flew into the fields. The flies on the wall buzzed and crept a little farther. Even the kitchen fire leapt up and blazed. At last, the wedding of the prince and princess was held with great feasting and rejoicing, and they lived happily together for the rest of their days. That was our fairy tale for today. Now we are going to do our comprehension questions and word work. If you need to hop up and take a wiggle break, go ahead and do that. All right. At the beginning of the fairy tale, why do the king and queen have a feast? What were they celebrating? The birth of their daughter. And who was invited to the feast? Their friends, their family, and 12 of the 13 fairies that lived in the country. What were some of the gifts given to the child by the fairies? The gifts of virtue and wisdom and beauty and riches. What does it mean to be given the gift of virtue? Virtue is goodness, right? So the gift of being good. Do you think that the king makes a good decision not to invite the 13th fairy? I don't think so. I don't think that that was very nice of him. Do I think that the 13th fairy should have cast an evil spell on the princess? No. But I don't think that it was very nice of him to leave just one out. Why is the 13th fairy angry? Why was she upset? Because she was the only one not invited to the feast. If you were the only one that wasn't invited, would you be upset? I know I would be upset if everybody else got invited. And what does she do because she's upset? She cast that spell on the princess, saying that she was going to die on her 15th birthday when she pricks her finger on a spindle. And how does the 12th fairy, who hadn't given her gift yet, how does she make that less of a problem? How does she kind of solve it or fix it? She changes the spell so that the princess will fall into a deep sleep for 100 years instead of dying, right? And then what does the king do to try and fix it? He tells everybody that all of the spindles need to come to the kingdom so that he can burn them. And what happens on the princess's 15th birthday when she finds a spindle? She pricked her finger and everybody in the whole kingdom fell asleep for 100 years. Why do you think that there's still a spindle in the castle after the king said that all of them needed to be burned? Maybe someone said that they needed to keep just one so that they could make the yarn. I don't know. How does the fairy tale end? The prince kisses the enchanted princess on the day the evil spell ends and the princess wakes up. And is that a happy ending? Yes, because then they get married and they live happily ever after. All right, so what parts of this story could not happen in real life? So which parts are fantasy? Magical fairies, um, being able to cast spells, falling asleep for 100 years and then waking up, right? Those are all things that are fantasy. Okay. In the read aloud, you heard another fairy said, I give you the gift of wisdom so that you may be wise. Say the word wisdom with me. Wisdom. Can you say it in a whisper voice? Wisdom. Can you clap out the syllables? Wisdom. Okay. If someone has wisdom, he or she has good judgment or understanding of what is right and wrong. Owls are often story characters who have great wisdom. Okay. All right. So our saying and or phrase for today is the saying the land of Nod. Has anybody ever heard that saying, the land of Nod? When someone is in the land of Nod, it's a way of saying that they're asleep. Have you ever gotten so tired that you start to fall asleep while sitting up and your head starts to bend or dip down in the moment, maybe like this? You know what I'm talking about? Well, when your head bends down or dips while you're falling asleep, it's called a nod. Okay, so if you're falling asleep, falling asleep, Okay, that's called a nod. So in Sleeping Beauty, how long was the princess in the land of Nod? For 100 years. What do you think she was most excited about? Whew. All this talking about entering the land of Nod has me yawning. What do you think she was most excited about when she woke up from the land of Nod? I think I'd probably be most excited about seeing my pets or eating dinner. I would be really hungry after 100 years of being asleep. So I'm going to give you a few examples of the land of entering the land of Nod, and you're going to decide if they're good examples or not, okay? After a long day at school, my sister entered the land of Nod for an hour when she got home. That would make sense. After a long day at school? Yeah. My uncle took a trip to the land of Nod to find his missing socks. I don't think so. He wouldn't go to sleep to find his missing socks. Okay, those were our two examples. If you can think of another example, then I want to hear it. All right. Did we discuss the elements of stories? Mm-hmm. Did we identify characters, settings, and events in a fairy tale? Mm-hmm. Did we demonstrate an understanding of the word wisdom and the phrase the land of Nod? Yes, we did. And then in a moment, you are going to write a sentence about one of the elements of Sleeping Beauty. So you can write about the characters, you can write about the setting, you can write about the fantasy parts, so the things that were magical. You can write about the problem and the solution. So you're just going to pick one of those story elements to write about. Okay? And you can draw a picture to match too if you want. All right, that is all I have for you today. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.